a world in which no one ever has to say goodbye too soon.
That is not an actress, that's not a parody, and it's not an AI voice, though we'll come back to that voice. That is a real CEO of a real $9 billion company pitching a machine to run 240 medical tests from one drop of blood. The machine never worked, she knew, and almost nobody for 12 years asked to see it run. One drop of blood. From a single finger prick, this machine promised to run hundreds of medical tests. No needles, no labs, no waiting. It made its inventor, a college dropout in her 20s, the youngest self-made female billionaire on the planet. On paper, $4.5 billion. So here's the question. How do you fool Henry Kissinger, a four-star general, Rupert Murdoch, and the smartest money in Silicon Valley, with an empty box? The answer says less about her than it says about everyone who believed. This is the story of Theranos, how a 19-year-old in a black turtleneck convinced Silicon Valley four-star generals and millions of patients to believe in a miracle that didn't exist, and how two people barely out of college brought the whole thing crashing down. To understand how it happened, you have to go back to the dream, because the dream was beautiful. Elizabeth Holmes grew up wanting to be a billionaire, and not for the money. She wanted to matter. As a teenager, she said she wanted to invent something that would change the world. In 2002, she enrolled at Stanford to study chemical engineering. She was brilliant, intense, and certain, and she was afraid of needles. That fear became the idea. What if you never needed the needle? What if a single drop of blood from a tiny prick of your finger could run every test a doctor might order, cheaper, faster, from a machine the size of a printer, sitting in your local pharmacy? In 2003, at 19, Holmes dropped out of Stanford to build it. She named the company Theranos, Therapy and Diagnosis, and she named the machine the Edison, after the world's most famous inventor, which is fitting, because Thomas Edison was also famous for demonstrating inventions that weren't quite finished yet. Now, before the money pours in, it's worth 30 seconds on why this was so hard, because the problem isn't the machine, it's the drop. Meet a drop of blood. It's tiny, about a 20th of a teaspoon. A normal lab draws whole vials, because most tests literally consume blood to run. 200 tests need more raw material than one drop contains, period. The only workaround is dilution, watering the sample down to stretch it. But dilute blood enough and you're no longer measuring the patient. You're measuring the water. Every lab scientist on Earth knew this. The investors Holmes pitched were not lab scientists. Remember this. It's the crack the whole story falls through. The pitch was irresistible, and Holmes was a once-in-a-generation salesperson. She wore black turtlenecks like Steve Jobs. She spoke about saving lives. Investors didn't just buy in, they fell in love with the story.
This is what happens when you work to change things, and first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world. And I have to say, I personally was shocked to see that the journal was...
She was right about one thing. They did think she was crazy. By 2010, Theranos was valued at $1 billion. By 2013, it had a partnership with Walgreens to put its machines inside real pharmacies. The vision was going national. One of the mesmerized believers writing checks would eventually hand over more than $100 million of his own. We'll meet him later. And then there's the voice. That low baritone you heard at the start of this video, according to former employees, professors, even family acquaintances, it wasn't her real voice. she allegedly trained herself to speak nearly an octave lower, because deep voices get taken seriously in boardrooms.
No.
Why not?
I work all the time, and I'm basically in the office from the really focused on leading with transparency.
Now had none.
I don't know specifically. I'm not sure.
Once you hear the slip, you can't unhear it. She held that voice for years, in interviews, on stages, under oath. If you catch the real voice slipping anywhere in this video's clips, timestamp it in the comments. And then came the board. Holmes assembled what might be the most powerful board of directors in American business history, two former U.S. Secretaries of State, George Shultz and Henry Kissinger, a future Secretary of Defense, General James Mattis, former senators, a four-star admiral. Look closely though, and you'll notice something. Almost none of them knew anything about medicine or laboratories or blood. They weren't there for the science, they were there for the credibility, and it worked. One name on that board matters more than all the others. Remember Schultz? By 2014, Elizabeth Holmes was a superstar. She landed on the cover of Fortune, then Forbes, then Inc., and T Magazine and Glamour. She gave a TED Talk. She dined at the White House. Theranos was valued at roughly $9 billion, and Holmes, who owned half of it, was on paper a multi-billionaire, the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world. The next Steve Jobs, everyone wanted to believe. So nobody looked inside the machine. Because inside the machine there was a secret. The Edison didn't work. It was wildly unreliable. The company had promised investors a device that could run more than 200 different tests from a single drop of blood. In reality, it could run only a handful, and even those came back wrong, again and again. So Theranos cheated. Quietly, behind the lab walls, they ran most of their tests on ordinary commercial machines, the exact machines made by other companies that Holmes claimed to be replacing. And to make a finger prick of blood fit those big machines, they diluted it. You already know what dilution does. They were measuring the water.
With transparency.
Now had none.
I don't know specifically. I'm not sure. I don't know exactly. I just don't know.
With Theranos' claims now under the microscope.
Did it concern you?
Years later, under oath, the founder who knew everything about her company would suddenly know nothing. She said, "I don't know," more than 600 times. The dream was a magic box, and the box was empty. For a company built on technology, that should have been the end. But Theranos wasn't selling technology. It was selling belief. And the believing was about to get dangerous. Because the most expensive decision Elizabeth Holmes ever made was about to happen inside a Walgreens. This is the part that's easy to forget under all the money. Real people walked into a Walgreens, rolled up a sleeve, or pricked a finger, and trusted Theranos with their health. The results came back wrong. One patient was told she might have HIV, a result that wasn't true. Pregnant women were given alarming numbers that sent them into panic. One woman with a history of miscarriage was led to believe she was losing her baby again. She wasn't. The baby was healthy. A man was handed a test suggesting prostate cancer. A patient on blood thinners had her medication changed based on numbers that were simply false. When the truth finally came out, Theranos would be forced to do something almost unheard of. It voided every single blood test it had ever run on its own machine, everyone, because it couldn't promise a single result had been real. But in 2014, the world didn't know any of that yet. From the outside, Theranos was a miracle. From the inside, two young employees were starting to panic. Their names were Erica Chung and Tyler Schultz, both in their early 20s. both new to the lab and both staring at the same thing: quality control data that kept failing, the machine telling on itself. They raised it. They were dismissed. And Tyler Schultz had the hardest possible position. His grandfather was George Schultz, the legendary statesman who sat on the Theranos board and adored Elizabeth Holmes. To tell the truth about the company, Tyler would have to go against his own grandfather. He did it anyway. They took their concerns outside the company, to regulators and to a reporter at the Wall Street Journal named John Carreyrou. Theranos fought back with everything it had. It hired one of the most feared attorneys in America, David Boies. Whistleblowers were followed, threatened, buried in legal pressure. The message was clear: stay quiet or be destroyed. On October 15, 2015, John Carreyrou published. The headline was simple: the startup everyone worshipped had been struggling with its technology and was secretly running its tests on other companies' machines. The magic box was empty, and now the whole world could see it. After that, it came apart fast. Federal regulators inspected the lab and found conditions that posed, in their words, immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services revoked the lab's license and banned Holmes from running a lab for 2 years. Walgreens pulled out and closed all 40 of its Theranos wellness centers. The $9 billion valuation evaporated. In 2018, the SEC charged Holmes and the company's president with massive fraud, raising more than $700 million from investors on claims that weren't true. Months later came the criminal charges, conspiracy and multiple counts of wire fraud. That September, Theranos shut down for good. And that believer from earlier, the one who wrote the biggest check, Rupert Murdoch. He put in roughly $125 million and later sold his entire stake back for $1 just to take the tax loss. He also happened to own the Wall Street Journal, and to his credit, when Holmes personally asked him to kill Carreyrou's story, he refused. The company that was going to change the world was simply gone. The man who ran Theranos alongside her was Ramesh Balwani, known as Sonny, the company's president, and for years, secretly, Holmes's boyfriend. They would be tried separately, and their stories would end very differently from how they began. In 2021, Elizabeth Holmes finally stood trial in San Jose. It lasted nearly 4 months. She testified in her own defense, and on January 3, 2022, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty. Though Holmes was convicted on 4 counts of defrauding the investors who had poured fortunes into her dream. On the charges related to patients, the jury did not convict, but the harm to those patients was real and it was documented. Months later, Sonny Balwani was convicted too, on all 12 counts against him. In November 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. Balwani got nearly 13. Together, they were ordered to pay $452 million to the people they defrauded. On May 30, 2023, the woman once called the next Steve Jobs walked into a federal prison camp in Bryan, Texas. She left behind a husband and 2 young children, and a cautionary tale that Silicon Valley still hasn't fully learned. Now, to be fair, the problem Holmes attacked is real. Blood testing is expensive, slow, and dominated by a couple of giants. Cheap, painless diagnostics in every pharmacy would genuinely save lives. The dream deserved to exist, and that's exactly what made the lie so powerful. Nobody had to be stupid to fall for it. They just had to want it to be true. So how did it happen? How did a teenager with a broken machine fool some of the smartest, most powerful people alive? After the turtlenecks, after the voice, after the board full of legends, after the magazine covers, after the White House dinners, the uncomfortable answer is they wanted to believe. Theranos sold a perfect story, and almost nobody checked whether the thing actually worked. In Silicon Valley, they have a phrase for it: fake it till you make it. Elizabeth Holmes faked it brilliantly. She just never made it. And if this pattern sounds familiar, it should. A charismatic founder, a miracle that's always almost ready, investors too dazzled to look inside the box. It's the same shape as Wirecard, the same shape as FTX, the same shape as 100 frauds before them. The names change. The machine never quite works. The next time someone sells you a miracle, ask the one question nobody at Theranos wanted to answer. Show me that it works. That's the story of Theranos, the $9 billion company built on a single drop of blood that was never real. But here's the question I can't shake, and I want to know where you land. Was Elizabeth Holmes a con artist from day one, or a true believer who kept lying just one more month, waiting for the machine to catch up with the story? Believer or fraud? Tell me which and why in the comments. If you want more stories like this, the collapses of FTX and Wirecard are right here on the channel. And if this video helped you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. See you in the next one.